Welcome to our annex at the library, where we have a live audience alongside those on Zoom for another in our autumn series of Invisible Histories talks. Our talks are free, but we do of course welcome donations, and there's a donate button on our website. We welcome today our speaker, Michael Sanders, whose topic is From Luddism to Chartism, John Stafford and the Creation of Radical Memory. Without further ado, over to you, Mike. You just need to do this.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for turning out. We're attempting, as Lynette said, something a little tricky for the technologically challenged, so bear with us if things seem to go a little awry. I have at least numbered the pages of my talk, so I shouldn't lose my place and need to talk about Peppa Pig at any point during the proceedings, but there's always a first. So I first encountered the subject of today's talk, John Ogden Stafford, also known as Jack Stafford and also known as the Charlestown Poet, in the Tameside Local Studies and Archives Centre in Ashton-under-Lyne. I was there doing archival research as part of the Piston Pen and Press project, which is an Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project exploring the ways in which industrial workers engaged with literary culture in Northern England and Scotland from the 1840s to the 1910s. And the Working Class Movement Library is one of our project partners, so I'm really delighted to be speaking at the Working Class Movement Library today. And another of our project partners, Jennifer Reid, the Broadside balladress herself, was also hoping to be here with us today, but unfortunately her work schedule had other ideas, so she's joining us by means of pre-recorded videos of some of the songs I'll be discussing. Whatever happens, I can promise you, I will not attempt to sing the songs myself under any circumstances. And I've forgotten the book. Also, as Lynette alluded to, we're also joined by Keith Philip Stafford, a direct descendant of John, and the author of a splendid book, which I hope you can see. I'll hold it up at the end of the talk, if you can as well, a splendid book about his great-great-great-grandfather, and he's also here with us today, so very exciting for me. Before turning to John Stafford's songs, I just want to offer a brief account of the immediate context. Ashton-under-Lyne, hereafter Ashton, is an industrial township 7 miles to the east of Manchester and close to the South Lancashire coalfield. And it underwent massive expansion from the end of the 18th through to the middle of the 19th century. Between 1770 and 1800, Ashton's population trebled to around 8,000 people as people moved to work in its burgeoning textile industry. Indeed, the district known as Charlestown, where John comes from, was built in the 1780s to house these new workers. And it's possible that the newness of Charleston and the consequent absence of those traditional authorities of parson and squire might possibly have assisted in the formation of Charlestown's radical reputation. Certainly, John Stafford's account of the celebrations for the coronation of King George IV in a song called Ashton Crownation suggests that Charleston folk were much more radical than their Ashton counterparts in the very early 19th century. Between 1800 and 1851, Ashton's population rose almost fivefold, from 8,000 to 36,000 people. It became a parliamentary borough in 1832 and a municipal borough in 1847, and its reputation was for upheaval and disturbance. Writing in 1849, the Morning Chronicle reporter Angus Bethune-Reach noted that Ashton people have the reputation of being turbulent and fanatical, and that the most ultra-political and theological opinions run riot amongst the population. And nor was Reach exaggerating. Ashton had links to both the Lancashire and West Riding Luddite movements in 1812, was sufficiently implicated in the underground politics of 1820 for the authorities to carry out a systematic search of homes in the Ashton area, which uncovered 18 pikes stored in 2 separate locations. And Ashton was also a stronghold of followers of Joanna Southcote, who under the leadership of Prophet John Roe began building the New Jerusalem there throughout the 1820s, and was also, of course, a militant Chartist town. Almost 2/3 of the town's population signed the 1842 Chartist petition, and a significant proportion of the town's Chartists were prepared to countenance the use of physical force and actually formed a national guard during the excitement of 1848 with somewhat tragic consequences. Now, they say that first impressions are often misleading, and they tell us to never judge a book by its cover, or in this case, don't judge this book by its title page. Songs, Comic and Sentimental, published by the Chartist printer and bookseller John Williamson in 1840. The innocuous and generic title can only be described as willfully misleading. For while the book does indeed consist entirely of songs, there is nothing which merits the description sentimental. And aside from 2 anti-Southcottian songs, there's nothing which can really be described as comic either. Instead, as the preface explains, these songs were composed, quote, for the advancement of the great and glorious cause of the people. 11 of the 13 songs deal with serious political and economic issues, including most of the radical and working class political and/or economic mobilizations of the first half of the 19th century. So we have songs about Luddism, about Peterloo, the Queen Caroline affair, the 10 Hours campaign, trades unionism, and then Chartism. These all provide Stafford with his subject matter. The only major political campaign that the working class was involved in this period that's missing is the New Poor Law. There is no anti-New Poor Law song in this collection. And as a whole, this song collection is remarkable for many reasons. Firstly, its author, the veteran radical John Stafford, was unable to read or write. And the only reason these songs survive is because a large circle of friends urged Stafford to collect and publish his songs. Secondly, the songs cover over 40 years of radical activity and a wide range of political events and movements, both local and national, and they help us, I think, in particular to understand the connection between the local and the national. And thirdly, precisely because they are songs, Stafford's compositions provide access to what we might call the soundscape of radical culture in the early 19th century. And there's really no other way of accessing that particular dimension of working class experience. We still have the newspapers, we still have the texts, but we do not have any record of what things sounded like. So songs are really important in that respect. Collectively, these songs, which are themselves, of course, totally dependent on one individual memory, because John couldn't read or write, they also provide an insight into the creation and dissemination of a communal radical memory in the first half of the 19th century, by which I mean when John sings these songs and when these songs are sung by Ashton-based radicals, not only are the events celebrated in the songs being remembered, but as it were, the memory of those events is being passed on down the generations as well. So we're actually seeing memory in the process of formation here. These are songs which don't simply record history, they actively create history in that sense. And it's important to remember that these songs create memory not only by means of their lyrics, but also through their tunes. As Kate Bowen and Paul Pickering argue in their Songs for the Millions, Chartist music and popular oral tradition, melody was a powerful mnemonic, a device to aid memory, that could both create and summon webs of associative symbolic meanings, drawing upon collective and individual memory. In some cases, they serve to create a kind of layering of political meaning, and I'll give a couple of examples later of what I mean by that. In addition to its role in generating complex meaning, Bowen and Pickering also observed that melody serves as the nexus, the connection between oral and print culture, while the use of well-known tunes also allows the audience to participate, thereby encouraging activity rather than passivity. And as a result, Bowen and Pickering call on historians to historicise melody as well as song lyrics, to think about the melody as well as the song. So with that call in mind, and given that 11 of the 13 songs in John Stafford's collection have specified tunes, so John indicated the tune that he thought should be used to sing them, what might be the significance of those chosen tunes? Well, of the 9 political songs with specific tunes, I've been able to track down details of 7, and the table that you can see on the screen gives details of the particular tunes that were used for various songs. Of these tunes, 2 are strongly connected with the American Revolutionary War or War of Independence. 2, possibly 3, have a strong Irish connection, and 2 are very firmly associated with Lancashire's weaving industry. So according to the traditional tune archive, Roslyn Castle, also known as the House of Glance, is a British marching tune which was used by forces on both sides of the American Revolutionary War and was frequently played on the pipes as a memorial air during military funerals. Stafford uses it as the setting for his Radical Juvenile Association, a song celebrating the sociability and political commitment of Ashton's Juvenile Radical Association. The other tune associated with the American Revolutionary War, Banks of the Dee, which is also known as Lango Lee, New Lago Lee, and Old Morris, was composed by a Scottish judge, John Tate, in honour of a friend who joined the British Army to fight in the War of Independence. Banks of the Dee provides the air to miners, a song which calls on the miners to form a trade union in order to realise their collective economic power. In both cases, tunes with military associations are used for songs celebrating particular organisational forms. The tunes presumably providing a sense of purpose and emphasising collective identity. You belong to the organisation, you're not simply an individual anymore. In addition, it's possible that the martial associations of these tunes reflects the widely held Chartist view that the obligation of military service ought to confer political rights on working class men. It's an argument that Chartists frequently use. You expect us to carry guns to defend the country, therefore we should be entitled to vote to elect the country's government, and might even be seen as alluding to the constitutional right to bear arms, which had been a matter of much discussion during the period of the first Chartist petition. The 2 tunes with undoubted Irish associations, The Sprig of Shillelagh and Green on the Cape, are examples of the kinds of layering of political meaning which Bowen and Pickering identify as one of the functions of melody. Sprig of Shillelagh was originally a bawdy song, Black Joke, known in London around 1730. However, Thomas Moore, the famous poet, friend of Byron, used it as the setting for Sublime Was the Warning That Liberty Spoke, a song celebrating Spain's War of Independence against Napoleon, which we often call the Peninsular War, and calling for the spirit of liberty to remember the cause of Ireland as well. So this combination of bawdy and serious political intent seems entirely appropriate for Stafford's Ashton election, which records the skullduggery and intimidation used by opponents of the radical candidate, Colonel George Williams, during the 1832 election. Early 19th century elections, to say they were boisterous affairs would be, to put it mildly. This song records gangs of people going round, beating up supporters of the other side, throwing stones through the windows of meeting houses and pubs where the other side is meeting. The song also celebrates the various thrashings handed out by William's radical supporters, as well as his eventual victory. So the good guys win in this particular case. The political significance of green on the Cape, also known as the wearing of the green, chosen by Stafford as the heir to one of his Peterloo songs, is unmistakable. Green on the Cape was a street ballad dated by Halliday Sperling to 1798, lamenting the repression of the Irish rebellion that same year. Another version of this song, Green on My Cape, published in Dundalk in 1802, features Robert Emmet, who would subsequently become a hero for many Chartists. Indeed, Ashton's young Chartists performed the trial of Robert Emmet as a play in venues around Ashton and Manchester during 1840 and 1841. In both cases, the association with Ireland not only emphasises the illegitimacy of the violence used by the loyalist opponents of radical reform, it also strengthens radicalism's insistence that the causes of English and Irish freedom are closely intertwined. Finally, these songs give some sense of the transmission of a tradition across time. The Irish Rebellion of 1798 is connected with Peterloo in 1819. The link with Ireland is reinforced by a song celebrating an election victory in 1832. And the combination of these songs and their associations underpins Chartism's strong identification with the cause of Ireland in the 1840s. Now, it can hardly be coincidence that the two most momentous confrontations between the nascent English working class and the British state to occur on Lancastrian soil, Luddism and Peterloo, are commemorated by Stafford in songs which use tunes strongly associated with the weaving industry, Tyrants of England and John of Grinfield. The former tune is used by Stafford as the setting for song during Ludding time, Watch and Ward, while the latter provides the air for another song concerning Peterloo. John of Grinfield, also known as the Four-Loom Weaver, the Oldham Weaver and the Poor Cotton Weaver, was written by John Lees sometime between 1803 and 1805, and has a strong claim to be considered as the most popular and exemplary weaver's song of the early 19th century. Roy Palmer, the folk song historian, dates Tyrants of England, which is also known as the Handloom Weaver's Lament, to around 1807, making it a near contemporary of John of Grinfield. In both cases, the original tune is so deeply imbricated in the culture and memory of the Lancashire handloom weavers that its very notes preserve the distilled essence of a generation's experience as they confronted the traumas of early capitalist industrialization. In other words, you can't hear this tune without thinking about the sufferings of those first generations that experienced industrialization. And at this point, I'm going to take a short break and play Jennifer singing John Stafford's Watch and Ward. So at this point, I'm going to look hopelessly towards Olivia. How do I, it's escape, isn't it?
Yeah, there should be a green line around the screen which is being shared.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want it to share that screen?
That screen.
Yeah. Would you like me to go on that?
Yeah, if you could. Thank you.
No worries. So we're sharing that screen.
If you just hit play, that'd be great. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, this one is song composed during Ludding time, Watch and Ward. And the tune is the Tyrants of Old England. So how it's written, the chorus, it's not the way that I know it, so I'm just going to do my own because that is my artistic license. Come, all you gallant heroes, to these few lines attend, and when you meet a brother, make freedom with your friend. If you love your wife and children for to have a happy life, you'll never take a gun in hand to fight against your wife. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. When you see your children starving, you would wish their bellies filled. But if you chance to speak a word, the soldiers must you kill. To see them naked before you will disturb you in your minds. When children 3 years old can say, I wish there better times. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. Like prisoners we are all kept up, our work it is so hard, and when at night they let us loose, they make us watch and ward, to guard those redneck turkeys that pulled us down so low. When you meet a working man, his face as white as snow. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. If you go into the poorhouse and there lay down your case, they'll call you idle vagabonds and turn you out of place. Or if you ask for money, they'll bid you to be gone. Go along, you idle vagabonds, for here you shall not come. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. Now we're brought down to poverty, to sorrow and distress, and when at night we go to sleep in bed we cannot rest. We must never be no better till the victory is won. Don't you see provisions are kept up by bayonet and gun? You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. Our clothing it is all worn out, like beggars we do stand, while they're eating of the best with ruffles down to thand. And when they get their bellies full with necks so red they'll swell, we'll make them rue that very day they worked us by a bill. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. These local militia, they are pretty lads indeed. Their masters dare not keep 'em up, nor with them dare proceed. Nor with their guns they dare not trust, for fear they should turn. Because they know they've done amiss, you've had too little corn. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. Ye tyrants old England, your time is near an end. I'll have you to and draw your purse and all your money spend. Likewise your feathered pheasants that's leathered up to knees will make their £1 notes to fly like ballads in the street. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done. Now I'll conclude me ditty, here's health to them that's good, and all true-hearted subjects that's made of patriots' blood. May God send them prosperity until the cause is won, and protect those gallant heroes that make the pheasants run. You tyrants of England, your race may soon be run. You may be brought into account for what you've sorely done.
So, welcome everyone. So that was Jennifer performing in her own inimitable style, Ye Tyrants, or John Stafford's version of Ye Tyrants of Old England. I just want to draw out a few key things that are being suggested by that song and the kinds of historical evidence that were being given here. There's firstly the great irony that they're prisoners of the factory by day, but they're also forced to guard their places of imprisonment by night, adding insult to injury there. There are contrasts that will become familiar throughout the early 19th century, and certainly will feature regularly in Chartist poetry. Workers who make clothes while their own are worn out, while the masters have ruffles down to the hand, have fancy clothing by the score. Workers and their families who are hungry, while the masters are like redneck turkeys with both swollen bellies and swollen necks through overeating. Workers who are pale through overwork and unwholesome working conditions, while the masters enjoy great health. It also describes what's practically a state of civil war. The masters can no longer trust the local militia. The local people can no longer be trusted with arms because the masters fear, quite rightly, there's a good chance those people will turn the arms against them for the various, depredations and sufferings they've inflicted. And so the regular troops have to be called in, and as the song reminds us, the existing order is kept up by bayonet and gun. The solution, as is so often the case, is simply the redistribution of wealth in that lovely image, making the pound notes fly like ballads in the street. Just redistributing the wealth will get it there. And clearly this is a song that is sympathetic to the Luddites. They are the true patriots in this song. It's their cause that is being celebrated. Now, the single most important event that is commemorated in Staffords Songs is Peterloo, which is the subject of two songs. And these two songs offer an important example of the way in which the memory of Peterloo, the story of Peterloo and its meaning for working class radicals in the Ashton area and beyond between 1819 and 1850 is created, solidified, and then passed on. The fact that Stafford includes two Peterloo songs in his collection is significant in itself and underscores the importance of Peterloo to radical identity at the time. Yet of even greater interest, I think, are the formal differences between the lyrical content of the two songs and the ways in which these interact with the different tunes used in each case. So the first song, just called Peterloo, is given in standard English and uses, as I noted earlier, the Irish air Green Upon the Cape, so a song associated with the Irish Rebellion. The song offers both a narrative and an interpretation of Peterloo. So we're being invited to remember events in particular ways, and in a sense, that's how political history works. You're allowed to remember things, provided you remember it like this. And there's always a kind of unofficial struggle going on between the way in which those people in charge want you to remember things and the way in which, as it were, ordinary people themselves remember what actually happened on that day. So this song begins by recording the date and the place and insists on the legal, festive, orderly and peaceful nature of the reformers. On the 16th day of August, it was held at Peterloo, a just and lawful meeting. We knew it to be true. With flags and caps of liberty, they did assemble there, both in peace and good order, the reformers did appear. The second verse introduces the villains of the piece, the tyrants and bloodhounds, the constables and vampires they came to rule that day. So the first two verses establish a clear contrast between the voluntary order and good nature of the reformers and the murderous intent of the tyrants. Verse 3 emphasizes the radical claim that the violent response of the authorities was premeditated and thus both illegal and unconstitutional. It claims that the violence was planned precisely because the authorities knew that the reformers were unarmed. In the song, the authorities declare, "For we know you are unarmed and will murder all we can." Verses 4 to 6 return to the orderliness and good feeling of the assembled crowd, described as patriots. Hunt's triumphant arrival and the significance of the presence of female reformers on the hustings are all described. And then, as Hunt prepares to speak, all hell breaks loose. There came that hellish crew to murder all poor people that were come to Peterloo. The inhumanity of the yeomanry is emphasized by the fact that they appear only as glittering swords and carbines. They're no longer people, they're just simply weapons of death and destruction. They're also described as un-English and alien. They're worse than Algerines, worse than Algerians, because they are murdering their own neighbours rather than strangers. So there would be some justification for fierce troops who are killing a foreign enemy. There's no justification for killing your neighbours. Verse 8 emphasises the bravery of the reformers who stand firm in the face of 3 attempted charges until a space was opened, presumably a reference to the sending in of the hussars to rescue the yeomanry cavalry. One of the sort of tragic ironies of Peterloo is that the yeomanry cavalry are in real trouble and the hussars have to kind of go in and rescue them to some extent. Verse 9 describes the arrest of Hunt. Verse 10 records the attack on Mary Fildes, unnamed in the song, but clearly Mary Fildes, who's attacked for refusing to surrender her flag. A valiant female, her colour she did fly till she could no longer hold it, says the song. Verse 11 reads like a description of George Cruikshank's print, which you can see on screen, Massacre at St. Peter's or Britain's Strike Home, as it records an assault on a poor woman struggling with an infant in her arms. And as Ian Haywood notes, Massacre at St. Peter's was one of two Cruikshank prints which provided the definitive visual identity of Peterloo. When you were thinking about Peterloo in the early 19th century, this is what you thought of, this is what you remembered if you'd seen the Cruikshank print. Verses 12 and 13 record another vignette, the attack by Thomas Shelmerdine on Mrs. Goodwin. Again, unnamed in the song, Mrs. Goodwin's unnamed, but Shelmerdine, who's called Shelberdine in the song, is actually named. And this episode struck a particular chord with Stafford because it crystallised those aspects of Peterloo which most outraged and traumatised the reformers. It's not only the unprovoked and unjustified attack on a defenceless woman looking to fulfil her maternal duties. Mrs. Goodwin was looking for her son in the immediate aftermath of Peterloo, but also the violation of the bonds of neighbourliness. She knew, this is how Stafford remembers it, she knew him from a child. She had lived in the same street. The old woman spoke right kindly and she called him by his name. I know you will not hurt me, Thomas Shelberdine, she said. But to fulfil his order like the rest of that same crew, he cut her down that instant as they did at Peterloo. And the song's two final stanzas bring the repercussions of Peterloo into the present. In the penultimate verse, the singer ironically praises the special constables for their role on the day. If you had no swords or carbines, you made your truncheons fly, he says, but also declares his intention to boycott their establishments. Both landlords and shopkeepers, your doors I will pass by. That I remember what you were doing on the day. I will not, shop in your shop. I will not drink in your pubs anymore. The closing verse moves from individual to collective action and calls on the brave patriots to unite together to gain your liberty and also to remember Peterloo. Now, Stafford's second song, called Another Song Concerning Peterloo, is unusual in a number of respects. It's one of only two songs in the collection written in dialect, the other being Ashton Crownation. But what's more remarkable is the fact that it doesn't offer a direct eyewitness account of Peterloo, because it's written from the perspective of two workers, Jem and Jack, who wanted to attend the meeting, but are late setting off for it because they've not been given permission to leave work until the afternoon. So it starts with Jem and Jack leaving work and deciding to go to Manchester. And as Jem and Jack draw nearer to Manchester, and Stafford, in a very interesting way, uses local landmarks to plot the progress of Jem and Jack. You can chart their progress on a map by the places he refers to. They begin to meet people returning from Peterloo, and thus they come to learn of the events at second hand. The first inkling they get that something is wrong occurs as they approach Guide Bridge, which is approximately 5.7 miles from St. Peter's Field and about 20 minutes into their journey. Here, they're passed by a mounted soldier, described as wearing a jacket dyed black and red and a horsetail on head. So not yeoman cavalry. Jem wonders if the rider is a spy. Jammy declares he's no yeoman cavalry, but both agree that he's clearly got some speedy news, for he went rare and fast. And our protagonists continue on their way, passing through Audenshaw, so they're now 5 miles from central Manchester, and noticing that all the weavers were gone, we could scarce Peterloo. And again, a kind of reminder of that 19th century soundscape that's lost to us. You know something serious has happened because the machines have stopped working. There is no background noise in the town. And they start to talk about Hunt and the reformers. Jamie remembers hearing Hunt speak at a previous meeting and confirms that he's a compelling speaker with an ability to explain the distressed condition of the workers. Hunt told him such tales when he stood up on the stage, what money they took out of every man's wage is how he remembers it. And again, that memory gives the lie to some accusations that were made that Hunt kind of parachuted in for Peterloo and then parachuted out afterwards. This suggests there's a much longer standing acquaintance of Lancashire workers with Hunt, which is one of the reasons why he gets invited. At the Blue Pig Public House in Audenshaw, Jem and Jamie start to hear reports of Peterloo. Firstly, from a middle-aged woman who advises them to turn back if they're unarmed. She says, unless you're taking your pikes, don't go, because the yeoman cavalry are drunk and they're killing folk at every street end. She continues with an acerbic comment on Manchester law and the extent of the arrests and the injuries meted out by the authorities. What they cannot kill fairly, they take to the New Bailey, she says, and the infirmaries filled with lame folk. On hearing this, Jem is struck cold with fear because he's worried about his relatives. As he says, there's our Sam, our Bill and Mary. They're killed, I just swear it. And Jem's fears increase as they get to Tolbar, just under 2 miles from St. Petersfield, and now they're meeting more and more people who are bearing clear marks of injury. Jamie asks the walking wounded why they didn't retaliate by throwing stones, only to be told that the stones had been cleared from the field the day before the meeting. Jem and Jamie continue onwards and they start meeting friends and acquaintances who advise them to turn back. One such acquaintance brings the alarming news that he last saw Sam and Bill standing close to the stage where many a person got killed. And then somewhat happier tidings that he's seen Mary. She's got away okay. On hearing this, they decide to return home. And on that part of the journey, they hear of the arrest of Hunt, as well as the attacks on the flags and caps of liberty. They're also told that the riders in the horses' tails, the hussars, behaved better than others, the yeomanry cavalry in particular. In the final verses, Jem is reunited with Bill on the road and learns from another returnee that Sam is also safely on his way back home. The song ends on a complex note, part relief at the safety of his own family, part realization that other families are not so fortunate, and part warning to the authorities that Peterloo is decidedly unfinished business. So I were better contented when I heard of thee. There folk upon the road that were more vexed than me. They think they've done it now, they've taken Mr. Hunt, but depend upon it, they're down in the black book. You know, we've made note, we will remember. Now, the memory of Peterloo played an important role in the life of Ashton Chartism. The town's Chartists celebrated Henry Hunt's birthday, 6th of November, every year. And I'm assuming this was probably a pre-existing radical celebration that it had occurred throughout the 20s and 30s and was grafted onto and continued by the Chartists. And we have reasonably detailed reports of these celebrations in the Northern Star for 1838, 39, 45, 46, 47, and 1849. And on 4 of these occasions, the paper records Stafford performing a song of his own composing called variously Peterloo or Peterloo Massacre. So we have distinct evidence of these songs being performed in the Chartist period. I'm now going to try and summon up another song from Jennifer. So down to there. How do I get this one? Is it showing on screen?
It should be, so that's just on
Is
screen.
it?
This song
Right.
is called Miners. The tune is The Banks of the Dee. It's a good one, good one. Come all you brave miners of high and low station, attend to my ditty and soon you shall hear. You men of the brave, now such men in this nation, when you are united, none with you compare. You can stop all the spinners, you can stop all the weavers, and tyrants of all sorts, you can stop all deceivers. Likewise that railway you can make 'em to leave it and fly o'er the seas to some foreign country. So come my brave miners and never be daunted, join the trades union while life does remain. Stand up for your prices, for your men that's still wanted. You work with more danger than men on the seas. Assist one another as long as you're able. Be steady and true like those knights at Round Table. See how Swift was cut off and others disabled. His children may weep and his widow may mourn. See the number of miners been cut off before him, and cripples been made with that dangerous trade. While you're working for bread, you're not sure of one moment of coming back safe to your dear families. There's many's a brave miner's gone to his work late at midnight, been brought home again a dead corpse before daylight. Many poor little Wagner has suffered the same boys, both widows and children their mothers may mourn. I came into Ashton one fine Sunday evening, when Swift, that brave miner, was laid in his grave. Peter said and was scarce able to walk by the corpse side, a short time before, whose life he had saved. Such a funeral before by no pen can be written, from his house to the grave scarce one word was spoken. The knights at the round table seemed quite full of trouble, the band played so deep and the miners did mourn. May God send prosperity to all the brave miners, protect those little wagon boys that works underground, that splits down those works which keeps us from starving. There's no better men in this world can be found. Let us join our trades union, both firm boys and willing. For a penny a week you will receive 10 shillings. For to bring back those prices they've taken so unfeeling, bad luck to those tyrants for the deeds they have done. Let us drink to the memory of all the brave miners, including those poor souls that suffered in Hyde, for it was well known that through their employers may all such like tyrants as them be destroyed. Let us join our trade union with small contribution, but still bear in mind, lads, the French Revolution. And the tyrants will tremble when you first accuse them of those deadly groans that they've caused to be done. Let us join our trade union with a small contribution, but still bear in mind, lads, the French Revolution. And the tyrants will tremble when you first accuse them of those deadly groans that they've caused to be done. I could sing that last part over and over and over.
So that So thanks to some excellent detective work by Alice Locke, it's almost certain that the Swift referred to in this song is John Swift. In address to the coal miners of Ashton-under-Lyne and its vicinity, written by John Howcroft and published in 1832. It's recorded that John Swift was killed by stones falling out of the side of the pit as he was getting in the tub to come out at Messrs. Whitaker and Lee's works in Hurst on the 2nd of February 1830. A later source gives the 2nd of February 1829 as the year of Swift's death, so it's sometime around then. As well as recording the fact of Swift's death, I think it's highly probable that this song was also written to encourage miners to join the recently formed Friendly Society of Coal Mining, founded in 1830 with its headquarters in Bolton. And as friendly societies often adopted antiquarian names, for example, the Ancient Order of Shepherds and the Ancient Order of Foresters, both important friendly societies in the Ashton area, it's possible that those references to the Knights of the Round Table might refer to a friendly society. And frequently in the 1830s, friendly societies provided a cover for early forms of trade union organisation. The legality of trade unions was a kind of live question at that time. A further feature of this song, which interests me, is its ability to move from the local to the national and even the international. For example, the first verse identifies the potential economic power of the miners as producers of the fuel which was literally driving the Industrial Revolution. If the miners were to take united strike action, Stafford tells them, you can stop all the spinners, you can stop all the weavers, and likewise the railway. And is this, I wonder, a vision of industrial action affecting multiple industries, an anticipation of William Benbow's Grand National Holiday, what we would today call a general strike, which was published in 1832. Similarly, might this song have had an impact on Dr. Peter Murray McDowell, one of Chartism's national leaders, one strongly associated with both Ashton and the general strike strategy? So, leaving speculation aside, in the final verse, a truly audacious couplet connects individual local activity with world historic events. Let us join our trade unions with a small contribution, but still bear in mind, lads, the French Revolution. So your union subs today, the revolution comes tomorrow, seems to be the suggestion here. And finally, to end with a song in which Stafford celebrates singing. So I referred earlier to the importance of Chartist conviviality, exemplified by the Hunt birthday celebrations, as well as other green letter days in the Chartist calendar, such as Thomas Paine's birthday and the commemoration of Peterloo itself. I'm going to give Jennifer singing Stafford's Radical Song, which was written for Ashton's Juvenile Radical Association. And as you listen to it, I'd ask you to think about the way in which politics is represented here as a pleasurable activity. It's an activity rooted in fundamental human relationships. It's about the best of us rather than the worst of us. There's also some lovely subversive punning that goes on around the idea of physical force. Chartist sociability is open-handed and generous. Our balls, they are open and free for the poor. No physical force shall stand guard at our door, as opposed to the entertainments organised by Chartism's middle-class opponents, where they have to have powder and ball, sword, bayonet and gun to guard their ball dancing, and they still call it fun. Verse 3 also has an interesting reminder to us that ways in which people think about the vote and the rights of voting has changed over the years. Here, the idea of the vote is that it's a public trust, not an individual property. That your vote is entrusted to you as a matter of public duty, and your task is to vote in the public interest, not in narrow self-interest. And that's contrasted with the behaviour of the shopkeepers, who are quite, as Stafford says, quite happy to take your money as individual Chartists, but when you put up a candidate, they run to sell their votes to your Whig and Tory opponents. There's also a reminder of the continued sufferings of the Chartist martyrs, Frost, Williams and Jones, about whom Stafford had written an earlier song. And the final verse, there's a strong sense of handing on a tradition. Stafford, by now in his 50s, recognising that his days are probably numbered, ends by imaginatively putting himself into the hands of the next generation. When I close my existence, then carried I will be with those juvenile lads that shout sweet liberty. So let's find Jennifer singing this song.
Is Roslyn Castle, but I just couldn't get my head around it in time. So beautiful tune though. So I've put it to the Rosemary, which is a canal song. Still works. It's good. You radical lads, wherever you may be, come and dance at our balls, let us be merry and free. With our sweethearts and wives may we always agree, and assist one another in sweet unity. Like brothers we will meet and will join hand in heart. We vow to each other we never will part. Then the tyrants will tremble and the traitors will flee. Yonder the juvenile lads shouting sweet liberty. So then tune up your fiddles, our time is but short. We'll dance and we'll sing and we'll push on our sport. Our balls they are open and free for the poor. No physical force shall stand guard at our door. We are not like those tyrants, our conscience is clear. These religious people that are weighed down with fear, they have powder and ball, sword, bayonet and gun, for to guard their ball dancing, and they still call it fun. Here are the middle class people, you know this I'm sure. They are full of delusion and they trample the poor. When you've paid all your earnings for victuals and clothes, there's not 1 out of 50 that will give you their vote. But against you they will run, you know very well. To a Whig or a Tory their vote for to sell. I can read their names over from door to door. Then the middle class people are rogues to the poor. You must still bear in mind brave Frost, Williams and Jones, how they dragged them poor fellas away from their homes, from dungeon to dungeon, both night time and day, to a ship filled with convicts for to cross the wide sea. And now they are gone, it still troubles me mind. So deceit in these middle class people I find. May the time soon arrive that they shall be set free. Yonder the juvenile lads shouting sweet liberty. 10,000 times over I have wished in me breast that the slave and the tyrant were equal in rest. Then the sun would shine clear and burn all bitter weed. Our gardens would flourish with liberty's seed. We are kept down with taxation, policemen and spies, and tyrants of all sorts and traitors with lies. But that bad class of people, we will banish 'em away. Yonder the juvenile lads shouting sweet liberty. With sweet peace and plenty we will dance and we'll sing. Our wives shall be crowned as well as the Queen, and those children shall sing that have been starving for bread. Our bellies are filled and the tyrants are dead. The dark day of danger is approaching, I see, when the higher and middle class people shall flee. Then we'll dance at our ball with our hearts full of glee. Yonder the juvenile lads that brought sweet liberty. I will finish my song to the lads of the brave. I was born in the year 98, poor white slave. On the 5th of December, me parents did say, I'm advancing in years, I must not long stay. But while I am with you, I am merry and free. Neither a Whig nor a Tory shall ever turn me. When I close me existence, then carried I'll be with those juvenile lads that shout sweet liberty.
Okay, so reporting on John Stafford's funeral in 1852, the Manchester Weekly Times noted that this unlettered and untaught genius was followed to his grave by several hundreds of his brother operatives and poetical and political admirers. Now, given that we can speak of carrying a tune, I don't think it's too far-fetched to imagine that in addition to carrying his body, those juvenile lads carried on singing his songs as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Mike, would you like to press stop share? And we will gather our audience together. Another stop share.
Stop share.
There we go. Right. Do we have any people who wish to raise a question or make a comment? Try to find all the participants. Let's get them down. Okay. Does anyone want to wave at me? I cannot see Audrey on the screen, so stick something in the chat if you wish.
Well, Ian Hamilton has raised his hand.
Oh, all right. We've got one in there. I'll take the one from here. If you could speak loudly, Robert.
Yeah, I just wanted to know whether any of the songs were written down and published in his lifetime.
Okay, so in case you didn't pick that up, the question was, were any of these songs written down and published in his lifetime? Well, the short answer is there is evidence that a couple of the songs were published in newspapers, in the Manchester Observer. Is that right, Keith? I think you've done some work on this. So a couple of songs at least were published in the Manchester Observer, but the convention at the time would be to publish just the words and to indicate the tune. So you'd give the tune in brackets, but they weren't published as music. The only ones that the collection was published in his lifetime, the one that we've been talking about today, but that's only about 13 songs in total. So there must have been a large number of songs that have effectively been lost to us.
Yes, I think, as Keith said, I think there's probably 5 or 6, right? Right, 5 or 6 songs that we've got notations of, but we haven't actually got a copy of the words of the song.
Can I just stop you there and see if people can on Zoom, can you hear what Keith is saying, or do we need to get him nearer a microphone? Yes, we can hear him. Yeah, keep projecting.
Yeah, there's about 5 or 6 notations of songs that are credited to him, but we haven't got any of the songs at this moment in time.
Yes.
Some of them seem to have been possibly written or performed after 1840, which is when the book was published.
Right.
So it may be that there were later songs anyway, but we're still searching for those songs, basically.
Okay, Helen's saying it's not so easy for her to hear, so I don't know if you have other things you want to say. Perhaps if you come nearer to the microphone. Basically, still searching for songs. Okay.
And crucially as well, Keith was saying that we have evidence of songs that were written or that were performed that John Stafford had composed, but which we don't have any surviving copies of. And certainly that's the case in those Northern Star reports, where in addition to John being recorded as singing a song, it's also recorded that another of his songs was sung, and we don't know. We get the title, but we don't get the lyrics, sadly. So there are lost songs out there.
I'm going to ask Ian to unmute himself because he's got a question for us.
Yeah, I'm sorry I was late arriving. Is there any chance that there will be a link to the full lecture?
Yes, it will be. It's being recorded and it will be going up on the library's YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Possibly tomorrow rather than later today, but hopefully by tomorrow. Yes, yeah. Well, all of our talks are recorded, and you can view and listen to all of them at your leisure in
Thank you.
On YouTube. Somebody else was asking whether the songs were online, so you might want to explain where you were taking that from.
Right, so the songs that you heard Jennifer perform so admirably were from a talk that I gave earlier this year as part of the Manchester Libraries Festival event. And if you Google Manchester Libraries Festival plus Ashton Poets, that'll take you to the link. We were talking about 3 Ashton-based poets in that particular talk, and in addition to the 3 songs from John Stafford, at the end of the talk, Jennifer does a really excellent rendition of a patter song by a young Chartist poet called Joseph Chapman called Billy Boy's Shop, and that's a real treat to watch. It's worth kind of hunting down the video recording for that performance alone, which again gives another insight into the nature of Ashton Chartism and just how firmly integrated into the town it was.
Marshall has a question for us. Marshall, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, thank you very much. Absolutely brilliant, both of you. The title, The Creation of Radical Memory. I'm very intrigued by the notion of creating memory almost on top of memory, and how that in turn rolls against the writing of history with a big H, if you like. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And is there a model here that could be applied to other situations?
Oh, a great question. And the short answer is yes, I think there is a model here which can be applied. The slightly longer answer goes something like this. My first interest, and still my abiding interest, is in the Chartist movement. And I'm always interested that if you mention Chartism to anybody who's kind of not a historian, if they know anything about Chartism, they tend to know about 1848, and it all ended badly. They might also know about the Newport uprising in the winter of 38-39, which also ended badly. But they never know about the general strike of 1842, which completely terrified the government of this country and which did not, in a sense, end badly. It ended, as I tell my students, it ended in a school draw, with the Chartists definitely enjoying the privilege of an away goal. And for those of you that follow European football, you'll understand the significance of that. The important point here is that it's a question of what you're allowed to remember. And so the official construction of Chartist history is we can remember Chartism, provided we remember that it was a complete failure, provided that we remember that it ended in disaster. In other words, it's something we don't really want you to think about. We don't really want you to remember, because the other memories that are crowded out there are the fact that, you know, working class people for an entire decade made a consistent challenge to the power of the state, to the power of money, and also, and I think this is the crucial thing, were demanding a series of democratic reforms. 5 of their 6 points are now accepted as the basis of any kind of functioning democratic system. And yet at the time they were denounced as extremists, as dangerous lunatics, and the authorities, the people that knew best, the intellectuals, the politicians, the commentators, all said it would be an absolute disaster if we were to give into any of these Chartist demands. So instead of a kind of history where democratic rights are won by ordinary people through their own activities, we're handed a version of history which says, oh, these things are handed to us by the great and good, at a time when the great and good have decided that we are sufficiently worthy of them, that we've demonstrated that we're capable of using these things. And it's that kind of tension between, for want of a better term, what I'll call official history and the unofficial history, which I think is the real history, which is made by people. And I think there is a constant battle over who we want to remember and who we want to forget, what events we want to remember, what events we want to forget. And I think that the value of the songs I was talking about today, they give an insight into the way in which, at a time when the working class movement didn't have much in the way of a publishing infrastructure, didn't have newspapers, or it had some newspapers, but didn't have that kind of real network. The way in which memory was communicated and passed on was through songs. And that's why it's important that we know them, because the power of those songs, I mean, you know, thinking towards the end of the 18th century, John Wesley, the famous Methodist leader, said, you know, I don't really care who writes the words, who sets the official dogma of the church, as long as I get to write the words and the tunes for the hymns, because that's what they'll sing and that's what they'll remember. So it's that kind of tension between official and unofficial history that I think is what I'm interested in here.
Thanks, Mike. A very specific question from Rose. Was the term middle class in common use during that period?
Yes. It starts to come into, there's a kind of shift occurs after Peterloo. Before, around the time of Peterloo, the kind of major descriptive terms are the people, which includes the working classes and the middle classes and the aristocracy or the elite. And by about the 1840s, by the time of Chartism, the idea of the middle classes as a distinct group, separate from the working class, really starts to emerge. And part of the reason for that is what's seen by the working class radicals as the great betrayal of 1832. So the Reform Act, which gives the vote to the middle classes, the deal as the workers understood it was that they would support the middle classes in their demand for the vote, and when the middle classes got inside the House of Commons, they would open the doors to give the vote to workers as well. And then it was discovered that once the middle class had got the vote for themselves, they were quite happy to join the parliamentary club and weren't interested in extending the vote to workers. And so at that point, the idea of a working class identity as opposed to a middle class identity starts to take real shape in the Victorian period and becomes a key way of understanding how the social system is working really for the rest of the 19th century.
We've got another question from Helen, who says, such an interesting talk. Do you know how long any of these songs continued to be sung? Did they survive into the later 19th or 20th century or even now?
Right, I'm going to hand over to Keith at this point because he actually has got some interesting things to say about this.
Yes, we're still doing some research on John, and indeed we found evidence recently that his songs were certainly being sung into the late 1880s in and around the Ashton area in Failsworth and places like that. So certainly evidence there, and obviously the evidence of the songs being sung at the Chartist meetings, and in fact all the radical meetings after Chartism finished into the 1860s. So definitely, yes, certainly.
So I mean, again, that seems to me so significant that these are songs that we have evidence were sung for over 6 decades. So, you know, at least 60 years and possibly longer as well.
Dave, I'm going to ask you to unmute. You have a question.
Yeah, Mike, what was the name of the publisher of his poems? And do you know anything more about him?
I know,
And also, while I'm on, could you mention the book that you were talking about at the beginning? Tell us what it was.
the book that I was talking about at the beginning, you'll have to bear with me on that one. It's Keith's book, right? I'm going to, in case you didn't show it, Keith has done this really excellent book. It's called Jack Stafford, Charlestown Poet and His Peterloo Family. And in this book, you'll find the lyrics for all of the songs that were published in that collection, plus some really excellent kind of contextual detail about Ashton, about the kinds of political events in the song, and about John Stafford and his family as well. The volume itself was published by a local Chartist publisher, John Williamson, who was local to Ashton. Beyond that, I don't know anything about John Williamson. I did a look for him in the Northern Star and couldn't find anything, and I haven't yet found any record of anything else that he published. But it's definitely a local production.
Have I got any more questions? Okay, yes.
Well, yeah, I was just, I mean, you may have partly answered the book, but I don't know if you could say anything about Mr. Stafford's own background and, you know, his evolution as a poet, how he started to use poetry in that way.
Question is about, do we know more about John Stafford's background?
Again, I'm gonna hand over to Keith as a descendant here.
You're with us, Stephen.
We don't have any evidence of when he actually started composing songs or poems. Certainly, he was involved in the radical scene from a very, very early age, and he came locally. But I'm not sure there's very much more I can add to that.
No, I mean, you know, he tells us himself he was born in 1890.
He was born in 1890.
Sorry,
yes.
1790.
1790, yes, that was wrong actually.
Yeah.
It wasn't 1790, it was 1790. Because I've been researching his history for 40 years, I suppose, now, all the family's history. Then I actually knew that he was baptised in early January 91, so that fitted in exactly with him. His background, I suppose, was that he came from a working class family who were weavers and spinners. His father moved over from Castleton in Derbyshire in the 1770s, first to Mosley, and then moved down to Ashton when Charlestown was like, say, new property.
Mm-hmm.
And then him and his brother and their families moved into Charlestown around that period, 1770-ish, something like that. So that's his background. Typically working class people who'd moved to Ashton, as many people did, because of the Industrial Revolution and the industrialisation of places like that.
And I guess on top of that, you know, we speculate that certainly ballads were sung frequently in the streets and in public. So presumably he hears ballads being sung from a fairly early age. If the family are religiously inclined and they're going to something other than the Anglican Church, then there's going to be hymn singing as well. So that kind of feeds in. Certainly the two Peterloo poems are written shortly after Peterloo, because one of those is published in the Manchester Observer, isn't it? Yeah, that's the one. So we know that. So certainly by the age of 18, 19, he's producing songs. And you were telling me actually today that in later life he became a beer seller.
Yes, that's an interesting. Him and his brother, one of the two that were injured at Peterloo, became beer sellers. So you were actually explaining about the last lines of Peterloo, how he said he would never cross the doors of the shopkeepers and innkeepers anymore. And I think he actually offered an alternative to the local radicals, come to my beer house instead. And I'm sure that the songs were actually sung in those places as well. Very much so, yeah. Yeah,
that seems like a well-founded assumption, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
The landlord, if the landlord is known, I mean, actually, there's a very nice microbrewery in Glossop which has a singing barman who's known for his facility with song, and occasionally the customers ask him to perform a number for him. You could well imagine that where you've got a group of radicals meeting together, then, you know, a call on Jack to give us a song and possibly say which song they want. And it was also noticeable, a couple of the numbers that Jennifer did, there are choruses. And I think, you know, part of the beauty of the chorus is you can join in. And it doesn't matter then whether you're able to read or write or not. Once you've heard the chorus once, if it's a good one, you can join in. So you can see it's a way of bringing people together. It's a sort of practical demonstration of the politics in that way.
Thanks. I think we may be okay. One last question. Maggie, can you speak to us loudly?
Yes, sorry, yeah. Yes, it was just, it struck me, you were referring to 1842, the way the Cold War period, when I was younger, they were referred to as the pub riots, not the general strike. And people like Eddie Bruce Brown, you know, referred to them as a general strike. And they were belittled by the historians of the capital age. Because it was only applied to the Midlands and the North. Well, that happened to me where there were steam engines and you could remove the plug. You know, those are the industrialised parts of the country. But I mean, this goes on and on, doesn't it?
Yes.
This way of, you know, undermining a more radical interpretation. It's just, you know.
And you're absolutely right, Maggie. The names are important, right? You know, the plug plot riots suggest disorder,
Yes.
suggest violence, suggest a degree of spontaneity,
And ignorance.
and ignorance in the way that Luddite comes to carry that pejorative term as well. What the general strike idea carries, or the mass strike idea carries, is that there was a degree of organisation, there was a degree of thought behind it. And there was also a kind of body capable of carrying it out. And the thing about the general strike of 42 is how little violence there is on the side of the workers. I mean, a different story on the side of the authorities, who shoot workers dead in Preston, who open fire on crowds of protesters in Halifax and in a number of other places as well. And there's a lovely, I was actually at the library a couple of weeks ago, and Lynette showed me the brochure that was produced to commemorate the opening of Manchester's Free Public Library. And there's a really fascinating moment in that where it's Ashton or Potter, who's the mayor at the time, Potter, gets up, and they're in what used to be the Owenite Hall of Science, down at the end of Deansgate, now part of the Museum of Science and Industry. They've taken over that building. The Owenites can no longer afford to keep it up. That building had been used for meetings of striking workers in 1842. It had been where the big delegate meeting had got in. And some over 10 years later, Potter, in his speech celebrating the opening of the Free Library, says to his audience, I'm sure, you know, you are as gratified as I am when we think about what happened in this building 10 years ago, i.e. the strike meeting, to think about the purposes it's going to be used for now. So in terms of local memory in Manchester, that was clearly a big enough deal that Potter felt it was one of the first things he wanted to talk about when opening, you know, the first free public library in England. That, I think, you know, shows, and then, as you say, the memory is allowed to, you know, we are encouraged to remember in a particular way, which, you know, lessens the threat, lessens the challenge, suggests there's no lesson to be learned either as well. So no, I think that's a really important point.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Mike remotely, to Jennifer, but also as an fantastic added bonus, Keith. descendant of John Stafford. How about that? Only at the Working Class Movement Library do we get these wonderful surprises. So, folks, if you joined us late or if you want to recommend this talk to others, it's been recorded and will be uploaded to the library's YouTube channel with a link on the event webpage. Next week, we'll be online only for our talk. So on Wednesday, the 8th of December at 2 p.m, we're pleased to welcome Geraldine Van Buren QC, whose topic is prohibiting class discrimination, taking equality seriously. So till then, best wishes to all of you here in person and on Zoom in solidarity from all at the Working Class Movement Library. Goodbye.